3 years ago, my boss fired me when I was 5 months pregnant. She looked me in the eye and said my performance wasn't meeting company standards anymore. We both knew that was a lie. What she didn't know was that I had been documenting everything for months. Now I know what you're thinking. Workplace discrimination happens all the time, and most people can't do anything about it. Fighting back is expensive, time-consuming, and you might lose anyway. A lot of people told me to just move on and find another job. But here's what happened when I decided to fight back. Not only did I win a $150,000 settlement, but my boss lost her job, her professional license, and her reputation. And the investigation revealed I wasn't the only one. She had done this to 3 other women. So let me walk you through exactly what happened. From the moment I announced my pregnancy and watched my boss's face change, to the systematic harassment that followed, to how I built my case and took her down. Because this isn't just about revenge. This is about knowing your rights and refusing to be a victim. Let me start with the day I was fired, because that's when everything came to a head. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was 5 months pregnant, just starting to really show. I'd been at the company for 3 years. I was a senior marketing coordinator at a mid-size consulting firm. My boss, let's call her Diana, called me into her office around 3 p.m. When I walked in, there was someone from HR sitting there. That's when I knew Diana didn't waste time. She said, "We need to talk about your performance. Over the past few months, we've noticed a significant decline in the quality of your work. We've documented multiple instances of missed deadlines, errors in client presentations, and lack of attention to detail. We've decided it's best if we part ways. Effective immediately." I just sat there for a second, stunned, because none of that was true. I asked to see the documentation. Diana slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printed emails, notes from meetings, marked up documents with my errors highlighted. It looked official. It looked legitimate, and that's exactly what she'd been building for the past 3 months. The HR person handed me a severance package. 2 weeks' pay. I had to sign it right then to get it. I didn't sign it. I said, "I'd like to take this home and review it with a lawyer." Diana's face changed. She said, "That's your right, of course, but the offer expires at the end of business today. If you don't sign, you get nothing." I stood up, took the folder, and said, "I'll take my chances." I walked out, grabbed my personal items, and left. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes just shaking. Not from fear, from rage, because I knew exactly what this was. This wasn't about my performance. This was about my pregnancy, and she thought she could get away with it. Here's what had been happening for the 3 months leading up to that firing. I announced my pregnancy at 12 weeks. I scheduled a meeting with Diana to tell her privately before making any general announcement. The moment I told her, her entire demeanor changed. She said congratulations, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. She asked when I was due. August 15th. She asked how much leave I planned to take. I said probably 12 weeks, the standard. And then she said something that should have been my first warning. She said, "Well, we'll need to make sure we have proper coverage for your accounts. This is going to be a challenge. Not, we'll figure it out, or congratulations, let's plan this together. Just, this is going to be a challenge." Like I'd announced I was getting a terminal illness instead of having a baby. Within a week, things started changing. First, she reassigned my biggest client account to a junior employee. Said she wanted to lighten my load so I wouldn't be stressed. But that account was 40% of my portfolio, and I'd been managing it successfully for 2 years. When I pushed back, Diana said, "I'm just thinking of your health and the baby. You should be grateful." Then she started scheduling important client meetings at 8 a.m. I had terrible morning sickness. I told her I was struggling with early meetings. She said, "If you can't commit to being here when the clients need you, maybe this isn't the right role for you anymore." She started ceasing herself on every email I sent, micromanaging every task, creating problems where none existed. And then came the documentation. She sent me an email saying I'd missed a deadline for a client presentation. I hadn't. I'd submitted it 2 days early. When I showed her the timestamp, she said, "Oh, I must have missed that. But the formatting wasn't what we discussed." We'd never discussed formatting. She claimed I'd made errors in a budget spreadsheet. The errors were rounding differences of literally $2 on a $100,000 budget. Every single criticism, Every tiny mistake was documented in writing. She was building a paper trail. She was manufacturing a performance issue so she could fire me without it looking like pregnancy discrimination. So I started documenting too. I saved every email. I took screenshots with timestamps. I started keeping a detailed log of every interaction. When she gave me impossible deadlines, I documented it. When she criticized my work unfairly, I documented it. When she made snide comments about my pregnancy, I documented it. By the time she fired me, I had 3 months of evidence showing a clear pattern. Before my pregnancy announcement, stellar performance reviews, 0 complaints. After my pregnancy announcement, suddenly everything I did was wrong. The pattern was so obvious, it was almost insulting. The day I told Diana I was pregnant is burned into my memory because of how quickly everything shifted. It was a Friday afternoon in February. I was 12 weeks along. We'd seen the heartbeat at the ultrasound. Everything looked healthy. I went into her office. She was in a good mood, talking about a new client we'd just signed. I sat down and said, "So I wanted to share some personal news with you. My husband and I are expecting a baby. I'm due in mid-August." I watched her face change. It was like someone flipped a switch. The smile froze. Her eyes went flat. There was this long, uncomfortable pause. Then she said, "Oh, congratulations." But her tone was wrong. It was the voice you use when someone tells you bad news and you're trying to be polite. She asked the basic questions. When was I due? Was I feeling okay? But she was distant, mechanical. And then she said, "Have you thought about maternity leave? How long are you planning to be out?" I said I was thinking 12 weeks, pretty standard. She nodded slowly and said, "That's going to be right in the middle of our busiest season. This is going to complicate things significantly. Not, we'll make it work. Just, this complicates things." I tried to reassure her. I said I'd help train someone to cover my accounts. I'd create detailed documentation. I wanted to be a team player. She cut me off. She said, "Let's talk about this more next week. I need to think about how we're going to handle this. Like my pregnancy was a problem to be managed." By Monday morning, everything had changed. She was cold, distant. That's when the reassignment started. That's when the micromanaging began. And I realized with this sinking feeling, she decided that weekend that I needed to go. Everything that happened after was just her building the case to fire me. The day after I was fired, I started researching employment lawyers who specialized in discrimination cases. I found a lawyer, let's call her Michelle, who had a track record of winning pregnancy discrimination cases. I sent her an email that night. She responded within an hour asking me to come in the next morning. When I met with Michelle, I brought everything. My performance reviews, the documentation of Diana's harassment, the folder Diana had given me with her manufactured evidence, the unsigned severance agreement, my own daily log of interactions. Michelle spent an hour going through it all. Then she looked at me and said, "This is one of the most clear-cut cases of pregnancy discrimination I've seen." She basically wrote the lawsuit for us. She explained the legal framework. The Pregnancy Discrimination Act makes it illegal to fire someone because they're pregnant. The key is proving that the pregnancy was the reason, not some legitimate performance issue. In my case, it was obvious. 3 years of excellent performance, then pregnancy announcement, then immediate decline in how I was treated, then firing 5 months later with manufactured performance issues. The timeline alone proved discrimination. Michelle recommended filing a complaint with the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. They'd investigate, and if they found merit, they'd try to mediate a settlement. So that's what we did. Michelle helped me file the complaint. It was detailed, 20 pages documenting everything. The EEOC accepted the complaint and opened an investigation. They sent notice to my former company that they were being investigated for pregnancy discrimination, and that's when things got interesting. The EEOC investigation took about 4 months. During that time, I was unemployed, 5 months pregnant, and terrified. Then, about 6 weeks into the investigation, Michelle called me with news. The EEOC investigator had found something. In reviewing the company's records, they'd discovered a pattern. I wasn't the first pregnant employee Diana had fired. Over the previous 5 years, 3 other women who worked under Diana had been terminated during or shortly after pregnancy. All 3 had excellent performance reviews before pregnancy. All 3 were fired for vague performance issues after announcing their pregnancy. The EEOC investigator contacted all 3 women. 2 of them agreed to provide statements. Their stories were almost identical to mine. Pregnancy announcement, sudden change in treatment, manufactured performance issues, termination. One woman had been fired when she was 7 months pregnant. Diana told her the stress of her role wasn't good for the baby, then fired her 2 weeks later for not being committed to her job. Another had been fired 3 months after returning from maternity leave. Diana claimed she wasn't the same employee anymore and had different priorities now. The pattern was undeniable. Diana had been systematically discriminating against pregnant employees for years, and she'd gotten away with it because she documented everything, made it look legitimate, and pressured women into signing NDAs so they couldn't talk about it. But she made one mistake with me. I didn't sign, and that meant the EEOC could investigate freely and uncover the pattern. The investigator also found emails. Internal emails between Diana and HR discussing the pregnancy situation. One email from Diana said, "We can't afford to have people taking extended leave right now." Another email, sent 2 days after I announced my pregnancy, Diana wrote, "Start documenting any performance issues with Sarah. I have a feeling we're going to need an airtight case." She'd literally written down her plan to build a fake case against me. In a company email, the EEOC's preliminary finding was clear. There was reasonable cause to believe that the company, and specifically Diana, had engaged in pregnancy discrimination as a pattern and practice. They scheduled a mediation session. The mediation happened when I was 8 months pregnant. I sat across a table from Diana, the company's CEO, and their lawyers. Diana wouldn't look at me. The EEOC mediator laid out the case. The pattern of discrimination, the emails, the statements from the other women. It was damning. The company's lawyer made a settlement offer, $50,000 and a neutral reference letter. In exchange, I'd sign an NDA, Michelle countered. $150,000, a strong reference letter, coverage of all my legal fees, and no NDA. And Diana's employment had to be terminated. The company lawyer tried to negotiate down. Michelle said, "Your client has been systematically discriminating against pregnant employees for at least 5 years. If this goes to court, you're looking at punitive damages and massive reputational damage. This is the deal. Take it or we'll see you in front of a jury." They asked for a break. 20 minutes later, they came back and accepted the offer with one modification. They wouldn't explicitly state in the agreement that Diana was terminated, but they confirmed she would no longer be employed by the company within 30 days. I signed. The settlement was finalized 2 weeks before I gave birth. $150,000. Plus they had to pay Michelle's legal fees. Another $20,000. Diana was fired, and the EEOC's investigation remained open to monitor the company's policies going forward. The money was life-changing. We paid off debt. We built up our emergency fund. And I used a big chunk of it to start my own marketing consulting business. I spent my maternity leave building the business. By the time my daughter was 3 months old, I was working part-time from home. By the time she was a year old, I was making more than I'd made at the company. And here's the beautiful part. I made my own schedule. I worked around my daughter's naps. I picked my own clients. I charged what I was worth. Diana didn't just lose her job. She lost her professional certification. The industry organization revoked her certification when they learned about the EEOC findings. Without that certification, she can't work in marketing management in our industry. Last I heard, she's working retail at a department store, making probably a fifth of what she used to make. The company had to pay out over $300,000 total to settle all the claims. And they had to completely overhaul their HR policies and report to the EEOC quarterly for 2 years. All because Diana thought she could fire pregnant women without consequences. So that's how my boss fired me for being pregnant, and how I made sure she lost everything. That settlement money, I used it to start my own consulting business. I now make 3 times what I made at that company. I set my own hours. I work from home. My daughter is 3 now and she's amazing. My former boss, she lost her career, her professional license, and her reputation. Here's what I learned from this whole experience, and I need you to hear this if you're going through something similar right now. First, document everything. The moment you feel something is off, start keeping records. Save every email, screenshot every text message. Write down conversations with dates, times, and witnesses, because when you have documentation, you have power. Second, know your rights. Pregnancy discrimination is illegal. Period. It doesn't matter if you're at a small company. It doesn't matter if they claim it's about performance. If you're being treated differently because you're pregnant, that's illegal. Third, don't sign anything without a lawyer reviewing it. When they fired me, they wanted me to sign that severance agreement immediately. If I had, I would have given up my right to sue. Always get a lawyer to review any severance agreement before you sign. Fourth, you are not alone. My boss had been doing this for years to other women. They stayed silent because they were afraid, or because they'd signed NDAs. But when we spoke up, the pattern became clear. And finally, sometimes the best revenge is success. I could have taken that settlement and walked away broken. Instead, I used it to build something better. I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving. My daughter asks me sometimes what I do for work. I tell her I help companies tell their stories, but what I'm really doing is showing her that you don't have to accept injustice, that you can fight back, that you can win. If you're dealing with pregnancy discrimination or workplace retaliation right now, please reach out to an employment lawyer. The consultation is usually free. You have more power than you think. And to anyone who's ever been told they're too much trouble because of their pregnancy or their family, you're not the problem. They are, and you deserve better. Thanks for listening to my story.